The evening sun was setting low behind the trees, painting the quiet neighborhood in shades of gold and orange. The streets were calm, only the soft sounds of kids playing a few blocks away and the rustle of leaves in the wind. A teenage boy walked home from basketball practice, his backpack slung over one shoulder and a basketball tucked under his arm. Sweat still clung to his forehead, but he felt good. It had been a long day at school, but the game had gone well. He was humming a tune, enjoying the walk home, not realizing how quickly his peaceful moment was about to change. He turned the corner toward his street when a police car slowed down beside him. At first, he thought nothing of it. Police cars passed through the neighborhood often. But then, the car stopped completely and the officer inside rolled down the window. The boy looked over, unsure what to do. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" the officer called out. The boy froze for a second, confused. He pointed at himself, wondering if the officer meant him. When the officer nodded sharply, he stopped walking. "Yes, sir?" he asked softly. The officer stepped out of the car, his hand resting on his belt. Another officer got out from the passenger side. The boy's heart began to race, but he tried to stay calm. He had seen videos online, stories of things going wrong in situations like this. He told himself to stay polite, stay still, and do what they said. "Where are you coming from?" the first officer asked, his tone sharp. "From basketball practice," the boy replied, holding up his gym bag. "It's just down the road at the school." The officer looked him up and down. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir." "Just a few blocks that way," he said, pointing toward his street. "Funny," the officer muttered. "We just got a call about a break-in. Suspects wearing dark clothes, carrying a bag. Sound familiar?" The boy's stomach tightened. He looked down at his own clothes, dark shorts, a hoodie, a gym bag. He wanted to laugh at the bad coincidence, but fear held his voice in place. "I didn't do anything. I was just walking home." The second officer circled around him slowly. "Let's see some ID." He fumbled to open his bag, his hands trembling slightly. His school ID was in his wallet, but as he reached for it, the first officer's voice barked out again. "Don't reach in the bag. Keep your hands where I can see them." The boy jumped, dropping the bag immediately. It hit the pavement with a soft thud. His hands shot into the air. His voice shook as he said, "It's just my ID, sir. I wasn't trying to do anything." People nearby began to slow down. A man walking his dog stopped at the corner watching. A woman across the street peered out her window. The scene was quiet but tense. The officers exchanged glances. One of them started questioning again. "What's your name?" He answered softly, almost whispering. His throat felt dry. "You got any weapons on you?" "No, sir." "Drugs?" "No, sir." "You sure about that?" The first officer stepped closer, squinting. "You look nervous." "I'm just scared," the boy admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't want any trouble." The second officer kneeled, picking up the backpack and unzipping it without asking. Inside were a pair of shoes, a water bottle, and his wallet. He pulled the wallet out and tossed it to the other officer. The first one flipped it open and looked at the ID. "So you're from here, huh?" he said, glancing at the address. "Yes, sir. I've lived here my whole life." "Then why are you walking around like you're hiding something?" The boy swallowed hard, trying not to cry. "I'm not hiding anything. I promise." The first officer sighed, shaking his head. "You kids think you can just walk around acting suspicious and expect nobody to notice." The words cut deep. He wanted to defend himself, but he remembered his mother's advice. Always stay calm. Don't argue. Be respectful even when you're scared. He nodded slowly. "Yes, sir," but inside his chest felt heavy. He thought about how unfair it was, how one wrong move, one misunderstood gesture could ruin everything. He was supposed to be home by now, maybe sitting down to dinner, laughing with his mom. Instead, he was standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by flashing lights and strangers who looked at him like he was guilty of something. A voice broke through the silence. A man from across the street called out, "Hey, he didn't do anything. I've seen that kid walking home from the gym every day." The officers ignored him. One of them radioed something in, still keeping an eye on the boy. "We're just checking things out," the officer said coldly. "If you've got nothing to hide, this'll be quick." But the seconds dragged. The boy shifted nervously from foot to foot, wishing his mom would call, wishing someone could explain what was happening. He wanted to believe this would all end soon, that they'd realize they made a mistake. Still, a deep fear pressed against his chest. What if they didn't? Another police car turned the corner and pulled up. 2 more officers stepped out. The boy's heart dropped. Why were there more? The flashing lights made his eyes sting. He could hear the whisper of people recording with their phones. The new officers started talking among themselves. One of them asked, "We got the right one?" The first officer shrugged. Still figuring it out, the boy tried to speak again. "Please, I didn't do anything. I'm just trying to go home." "Stay quiet," one of them snapped. He bit his lip. His voice faded. A lump formed in his throat as he looked down at the pavement. His basketball had rolled to the curb. The sight of it made him want to cry. It was something simple, something normal, but in that moment nothing felt normal anymore. The wind blew softly, carrying a chill. A woman nearby whispered, "This is getting out of hand." Someone else said, "That poor kid." But no one dared to step closer. Then, one of the officers moved toward him again. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." The boy's breath caught. "Wait, why?" "I didn't do it now." He turned slowly, tears welling in his eyes. His hands trembled as he lifted them behind him. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut felt like thunder in his ears. At that moment, a car came speeding around the corner and screeched to a stop nearby. The door flung open before the engine even shut off. A woman stepped out, tall, confident, still wearing her work jacket. Her eyes locked on her son instantly. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the cuffs on his wrists. The officers looked up, startled by the sound of her voice as she called out, "What on earth are you doing to my son?" Her tone was calm but fierce, the kind of voice that demanded answers. She walked quickly toward them, her footsteps echoing on the pavement. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain of who she was. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a badge, and held it up. The air seemed to freeze. The badge caught the light, bold, unmistakable. FPN and one of the officers blinked, taking a small step back. The other stammered, "Ma'am, we were just—" "You were just what?" she interrupted, her voice steady but sharp. She stood between them and her son in an instant. "You were just handcuffing a child who did nothing wrong." The boy could hardly breathe. Relief washed over him, but he was still shaking. The woman turned slightly, touching his arm gently. "It's okay. I'm here," she whispered. The officers began to speak at once, stumbling over explanations. Something about a call, a matching description, a misunderstanding. But she didn't let them finish. Her eyes were full of anger and disbelief, not loud but powerful. "You had no probable cause. You didn't verify his ID. You escalated without reason," she said firmly. Her tone wasn't shouting, but it cut through the air like a blade. The officers fell silent. The crowd that had gathered stayed quiet too. A few people lowered their phones, others kept recording. The street was still, the air heavy. One of the officers finally said softly, "We didn't know he was your son." She glared at him. "That's exactly the problem." For a long moment no one spoke. The flashing lights reflected off her badge and his tear-streaked face. The boy stood beside his mother, still trembling but now breathing a little easier. She stayed in front of him, calm and unmoving like a shield. The tension hung in the air, thick and unspoken, a mix of fear, power, and truth. Everyone could feel it. Something had changed the moment she stepped in, and as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the trees, the officers, once so confident, suddenly didn't seem sure of themselves anymore. The night air felt heavy, even after the police cars drove away. The flashing lights had finally gone, but their glow still lingered in everyone's memory. The boy sat quietly in the passenger seat of his mother's car, staring out the window. His hand still shook a little. He hadn't said much since they left. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the faint buzz of streetlights as they passed. His mother kept her eyes on the road. She didn't speak either, not at first. Her jaw was tight and her fingers gripped the steering wheel a little too hard. She had been trained to stay calm in intense situations, but this time was different. This wasn't an operation, and it wasn't a suspect. It was her son. After a few minutes, she glanced toward him and asked softly, "Are you okay?" He nodded, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. "Yeah, I think so." She could tell he wasn't. His voice was quiet, distant. She wanted to pull over, hug him, and tell him everything would be fine. But she knew right now he needed space to breathe. The silence between them was full of things neither of them knew how to say. When they reached home, the boy went straight to his room and sat on the edge of his bed. The events replayed in his head like a movie he didn't want to see again. The police lights, the shouting, the sound of the handcuffs clicking. He could still feel the cold metal around his wrists. His mother stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping in. She sat beside him quietly. For a long time, they didn't speak. Then she reached over, taking his hand in hers. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," she said softly. He looked at her, eyes wide. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom," she sighed. "I know, but I've seen this happen to other people for years. I just never thought it would happen to you." He nodded slowly, looking down. "I thought they were going to. I don't know. I was scared." She closed her eyes for a second, holding back tears. "I know you were. And you did everything right. You stayed calm. You listened. I'm proud of you for that." He wanted to believe her, but his heart still hurt. "They didn't even ask me real questions. They just looked at me like I was already guilty." She squeezed his hand gently. "That's not your fault. And it's not okay, but it's something we're going to deal with. I promise." He looked up at her, surprised. "Deal with it how?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There are ways to report things like this, to make sure it's investigated properly. I've done it for other people before. I'll do it for you." He didn't say anything, but the small spark of hope in her voice made him feel a little lighter. The next morning, she woke up early. She had already made coffee and set her laptop on the kitchen table. She wasn't just a mom today. She was an FBI agent, and she was on a mission. She started typing up a full report, listing every detail: time, place, badge numbers, everything she remembered. Her son walked in halfway through, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, glancing up with a small smile. "You sleep okay?" He shrugged. "A little." She looked at him carefully. "You want to sit with me while I go over this?" He nodded and sat down beside her. As she explained what she was writing, he began to understand that she wasn't just angry. She was determined. She wanted justice, not revenge. She wanted to make sure no one else would be treated the way her son was. Later that day, she made some calls. One was to a friend in the department who worked in internal affairs. The other was to her field office supervisor, informing them that she was filing a formal complaint. Her tone was calm, but her voice carried strength. This wasn't just personal. It was professional. Meanwhile, word of the incident had already spread. A neighbor had posted part of the video online the night before. By morning, hundreds of people had seen it. Comments poured in, some expressing anger, others disbelief. How could this happen? He was just a kid. They need to be held accountable. The story was gaining attention, and by afternoon, local reporters were already asking questions. When she saw the video online, the mother felt a mix of emotions. Pride because her son had stayed calm through it all, but also heartbreak, because seeing it from the outside made it even more real. She reached over and paused the video before it reached the part where she arrived. Her son, sitting beside her, whispered, "I didn't think it looked that bad when it was happening, but now?" She nodded slowly. "Sometimes it's worse when you see it from the outside. But it's also proof of what really happened." A few days later, a representative from the police department came to their home. He was polite, careful with his words. He apologized for the incident and promised an internal review. But she could tell he was mostly trying to protect the department's image. She stayed professional but firm. "My son was treated like a criminal for walking home," she said evenly. "That's not something you can call an incident. That's misconduct." The representative cleared his throat. "We take these matters seriously." She leaned forward slightly. "Good, because so do I." After he left, she sat down with her son again. He had been listening from the hallway. "Did you believe him?" he asked. She sighed. "I believe he wants to make this go away quietly. But that's not going to happen." Her son nodded slowly. "What if they say I did something wrong?" She looked at him carefully. "Then we tell the truth, every detail, and we show them the video. The truth is enough." The following week, they were invited to speak to an independent review board. It wasn't easy for him, sitting in a room full of adults, answering questions about something that still made his stomach twist. But his mother sat beside him the whole time, steady and strong. She didn't speak over him. She let him tell his story in his own voice. When he finished, one of the board members said quietly, "You handled yourself with a lot of courage. Not many people your age could do that." He gave a small nod, not sure what to say. Afterward, as they walked to the car, his mother put an arm around his shoulders. "You did great," she said softly. He smiled faintly. I just told the truth. That's what makes it powerful, she replied. Over the next few days, messages started coming in from people they didn't even know. Strangers sent letters and emails, sharing their own stories. Some said they had faced the same kind of thing. Others said they were inspired by how calmly the boy had handled himself. The support helped. It reminded them that they weren't alone, but not everyone was kind. A few people online questioned the story, saying things like, "He must have done something," or "Cops don't stop people for no reason." His mother warned him not to read the comments, but he couldn't help it. Some of them hurt deeply. One night, as they sat on the couch, he asked quietly, "Why do people hate me when they don't even know me?" She took a long breath before answering, because sometimes people don't want to see what's right in front of them. They'd rather believe things are fair even when they're not, but you can't let their blindness define who you are. He nodded, though his heart still felt heavy. She pulled him closer, resting his head on her shoulder. "You have to remember something," she whispered. "What happened to you was wrong, but how you responded, that showed who you really are. You stayed calm, you stayed kind, you stayed alive. That's strength." The next morning, the story hit the local news. The headline read, "Teen wrongly detained. FBI agent mother demands accountability." The footage showed only parts of the confrontation, but it was enough to spark discussion across the city. Community leaders began calling for change. The mayor's office even released a short statement, promising to review police training procedures. For the first time since that night, the boy saw a small light in all the darkness. People were paying attention. His voice and his mother's had started something bigger than both of them. That night, as they sat at the table eating dinner, the boy looked at his mother and said, "Do you think it'll make a difference?" She smiled gently. "Maybe not right away, but change starts small. It starts with one voice, one story, and now people are listening." He nodded, feeling a quiet strength return to him. The fear from that night hadn't disappeared, but something new had taken its place. Courage. He didn't know what would happen next, or if the officers would ever really be held accountable. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Not for himself and not for anyone else who might go through the same thing. And as the night grew quiet again for the first time in days, the house felt calm. Not because the fear was gone, but because they were finally facing it together. The days after the news broke were a blur. Reporters called the house, community members left flowers at their doorstep, and messages kept coming from people all over the country. Some offered support, others shared their own painful experiences. The boy felt strange seeing his face on the news. He didn't want fame, he just wanted his life to go back to normal. But deep down he knew things would never be quite the same again. His mother tried to keep everything balanced. She still went to work every morning, pretending nothing had changed even though whispers followed her in the hallway. Some colleagues avoided her, unsure of what to say. Others quietly thanked her for standing up. She carried herself with calm confidence, but inside she was tired. She had spent years helping other families find justice. Now it was her turn, and it felt heavier than she ever imagined. One evening after dinner, she and her son sat at the table going over school assignments. He had been struggling to focus since the incident. Every time he saw a police car outside the window, his chest tightened. His mother noticed it but didn't pressure him to talk. She knew healing couldn't be forced. Then the phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. It was her supervisor. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she said, her tone steady. "Agent, I saw the reports." The voice on the other end said carefully, "This situation with your son. I want you to know the Bureau is behind you." "Thank you," she replied. "That means a lot." "But," he continued, "you should also be aware that the department involved has requested cooperation for their internal review. They might ask for a statement from you officially." She nodded to herself. Understood. After the call ended, she sat quietly for a moment. Her son looked at her curiously. "Was that work?" "Yeah," she said softly. "They're doing an investigation. I might have to talk to them soon." He frowned. "Are they in trouble?" "They will be if the truth is taken seriously," she said honestly. "But these things take time." Over the next week, more developments unfolded. The police department released a short statement saying the officers had been placed on temporary leave, pending investigation. Some people praised the decision. Others said it was too harsh without full context. Social media buzzed with debates, but for the family, all that noise meant little. They just wanted peace. At school, things were different too. His friends treated him gently like he was fragile. Teachers gave him more time for assignments. Even the principal called him into the office one day to check in. "You've been very brave," the principal said. "If you need to talk to anyone, our counselor's here for you." He nodded, thanking her, but inside he just wanted to be seen as normal again. He didn't want to be the kid from the news. He didn't want pity. He just wanted to walk through the halls without people whispering. One afternoon, as he was leaving school, a classmate caught up to him. "Hey," the boy said quietly, "I saw what happened." "I'm sorry, man. That was messed up." The teen gave a small smile. "Thanks." They walked together in silence for a bit before the classmate asked, "Aren't you scared it could happen again?" He paused. "Yeah," he admitted. "But my mom says we can't live in fear. We just have to be aware, careful, and keep speaking up." The other boy nodded thoughtfully. "Your mom's cool." A soft laugh escaped him. "Yeah, she is." That night, his mother sat on the couch with a folder open in front of her. Inside were printed reports, her notes, and screenshots from the video. She was preparing for a meeting with the Civil Rights Division. Her son walked in carrying 2 cups of tea. "You look serious," he said with a small smile. She chuckled lightly. "That's because I am." He handed her a cup. "I made this for you." She took it, touched by the gesture. "Thank you." He sat beside her and glanced at the papers. "You're still working on that?" "Yes," she said. "I want to make sure the report is strong. Every word matters." He leaned back. "It's crazy. I used to think stuff like this only happened on TV." She gave a sad smile. "I wish that were true." For a while they sat quietly sipping tea. Then he asked softly, "Do you think they'll actually listen?" She thought for a moment. "Some will, some won't. But we don't stay silent just because people might ignore us." Her calm tone gave him comfort. She wasn't angry anymore, just focused. It reminded him of how she'd looked that night on the street, steady, unshaken, in control. The next day she met with the investigators. She wore her badge on her belt, her posture straight. The room was filled with officials taking notes, recording every word. She described the entire incident, from the moment the police car stopped to when she arrived on the scene. Her voice never wavered. One of the investigators asked, "Were you concerned for your safety when you intervened?" "I was concerned for my son's life," she said simply. "Every second I wasn't there could have been the second I lost him." The room went silent. The investigator nodded slowly, writing something down. When the meeting ended, one of the officials walked her to the door and said quietly, "You handled that well. Your composure speaks volumes." She thanked him and left the building, but as soon as she sat in her car, she let out a deep breath. The pressure of staying calm, of being professional while her heart still ached, was exhausting. But she knew she couldn't stop now. At home, her son was waiting for her. "How'd it go?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Better than expected." They spent the evening cooking dinner together, something simple. For a while it almost felt normal again. Music played softly from her phone. They laughed a little. But then, during a quiet moment, he said, "You know, I still think about that night sometimes." She looked at him gently. "That's normal. It's going to take time." "I keep wondering what would have happened if you didn't show up when you did," he said quietly. She reached over, taking his hand. "Don't think about that, sweetheart. What matters is I did, and you're safe now." He nodded, though part of him knew that the fear would always stay somewhere deep inside. Not constant, but like a shadow that never fully disappeared. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A local community group invited both of them to speak at a town meeting about police relations and community safety. At first, the boy didn't want to go. The thought of standing in front of people and talking about what happened made his stomach twist. But his mother encouraged him gently. "Sometimes sharing what you've been through helps others too. You never know who might need to hear it." After thinking about it, he agreed. When they arrived at the community center, the room was full. Parents, students, officers, and local leaders all sat together. There was a quiet tension in the air, but also curiosity. When it was their turn to speak, his mother started first. She spoke calmly about accountability, training, and communication. She didn't blame every officer. She focused on the importance of awareness and empathy. Then it was his turn. He stepped up to the microphone, hands shaking slightly. He took a breath. "I never thought something like that would happen to me," he said softly. "I was just walking home. I didn't even know what I did wrong. But I remember how scared I was. And I remember how it felt when my mom showed up and stood up for me. That moment changed everything. Not just for me, but for how I see the world." He looked out at the crowd, and for the first time he didn't feel small. "I'm not here to hate anyone. I just want people to understand that fear shouldn't be a normal part of growing up. Everyone deserves to feel safe." The room was quiet. Then slowly people began to clap. Some even stood. He looked over at his mom. She was smiling, proud but emotional. That night, as they drove home, the air in the car felt lighter. He looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "You were right," he said quietly. "It felt good to talk about it," she smiled softly. "See? Sometimes strength isn't about fighting. It's about speaking." The following morning, local media covered the town meeting. Headlines read, "Teen speaks out about hope and change." The story spread again, but this time it wasn't about fear or injustice, it was about courage, community, and healing. At school, people greeted him differently. Not with pity, but with respect. Teachers smiled at him. Even some of the kids who never talked to him before gave him nods of encouragement. That evening, as he and his mother sat together on the porch, "The sky painted with soft pink clouds," he said. "Maybe something good really can come from all this." His mother nodded, gazing into the distance. That's how change happens, one story at a time. For the first time since that night, peace settled over both of them. The fear was still there, but now it had been replaced with something stronger: hope. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, they knew they wouldn't be walking it alone. The moment the mother stepped in, the officers froze. The sound of her calm yet commanding voice cut through the noise of the flashing lights and murmuring crowd. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made everyone stop moving. The boy stood behind her, eyes wide, breathing heavily, unsure if he should speak or stay silent. The officers exchanged glances, suddenly unsure of themselves. One of them muttered something about doing their job, but his voice cracked slightly. The mother turned to face him, her badge clearly visible at her waist. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes were steady. "Your job?" she asked quietly. "Does your job include harassing an unarmed child on his way home?" The officer tried to respond, but she didn't give him a chance. "Did you ask his name? Did you check the ID in his hand before surrounding him like a criminal?" Her voice was controlled, but every word hit with the weight of truth. The small crowd around them had grown silent, phones still recording. Everyone could sense something had shifted. The power that once belonged to the uniforms now rested entirely with this mother who refused to be silent. The officer who had been leading the stop looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. His partner, the one who had first reached for his holster, took a step back, unsure what to do next. The mother turned to her son. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, the steel in her voice melting into warmth. He nodded shakily, his hands still trembling. "I'm fine," he whispered. But she could see he wasn't. His eyes were glassy, his chest rising and falling too fast. She pulled him slightly behind her and faced the officers again. "You're done here," she said firmly. One of the officers tried to argue, saying they had a suspect wearing similar clothes, but the mother's expression didn't change. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You made a mistake. A serious one. And now you're going to hand me your badge number, your name, and the report of this stop. Because if you don't, internal affairs will be the least of your worries." The officer's face turned red. The others looked at each other helplessly. Finally, one of them mumbled his badge number. The mother calmly took out her phone, recorded it, and asked for the next one. Each officer complied. The crowd murmured, impressed by her calm confidence. A few minutes later, a supervisor arrived. He was older, his hair turning gray, his posture careful. He approached slowly, speaking in a smooth tone that was meant to calm things down. "Ma'am," he said politely, "I understand this looks bad, but it's all a misunderstanding. We got a call about a possible theft suspect and your son." The mother raised a hand, stopping him. "My son is not a suspect," she said sharply. "He's a kid walking home. You escalated without reason and you terrified him. You think calling it a misunderstanding erases that?" The supervisor's mouth opened, but no words came out. The mother pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket and began writing down details. Badge numbers, patrol car numbers, times. Every move she made was calm, deliberate. Her son watched, still trying to catch his breath, amazed at how composed she was. Inside, though, she was fighting her own wave of fear and anger. In her career, she had faced dangerous suspects, raids, and high-stress situations, but nothing compared to seeing her own child treated like a threat. Finally, she took her son's hand and started walking him toward her car. The crowd parted for them, murmuring words of support. Someone called out, "We saw everything. We've got it on video." She nodded gratefully but said nothing. She just wanted to get her son home. Once inside the car, she took a deep breath, trying to steady her hands on the steering wheel. Her son sat silently, staring out the window, tears rolling down his cheeks. After a moment, she turned to him. "You did nothing wrong," she said softly. "Do you understand me?" "Nothing," he nodded, wiping his face. "I was just walking home," he whispered. "I didn't even know what was happening. I thought—" He trailed off. She reached over and held his hand tightly. "I know," she said. "It's over now. You're safe." But she knew it wasn't truly over. Not for her, not for him. The images of what almost happened kept flashing through her mind. She could still see the officer's hand hovering near his weapon, her son's frightened face, the disbelief in the crowd's eyes. That moment had changed everything. When they got home, the air inside the house felt heavy. She guided him to the couch and sat beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, "Mom, you didn't have to come like that." She looked at him surprised. "What do you mean?" He shrugged weakly. "You're always telling me to stay calm, to respect authority. I didn't want to make it worse." The mother felt a lump in her throat. "You didn't make it worse," she said gently. "They did. And yes, I tell you to stay calm, but that doesn't mean you have to accept being treated unfairly." She stood up, pacing the room. "Do you know how many times I've seen this happen in reports, in cases I've worked on? I thought I understood it. But tonight it was my child, my own son." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't let the tears fall. She needed to stay strong for him. "This can't just end with us going home and forgetting about it," she said. "There has to be accountability." He watched her quietly, still shaken but starting to understand that she wasn't just his mother right now. She was a woman who had seen too much injustice to let it slide. Later that night, she sat at her desk, typing up a detailed report. Her badge and ID lay beside her laptop. Every word she typed was precise, describing exactly what she witnessed. She attached copies of the videos people had sent her, time-stamped everything, and sent the file directly to her FBI office. She knew procedures, knew exactly what would happen next. Internal Affairs would open a review, and she would make sure it didn't get buried. Her son came in quietly, standing in the doorway. "Mom," he said softly. "Yeah?" she replied without looking up. "Are they going to get in trouble?" She stopped typing and looked at him. "If I can help it, yes. But more importantly, they're going to learn something, because what they did tonight can't keep happening." He nodded and came closer, hugging her from behind. She rested her hand on his arm. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "for staying calm, for trusting me even when you were scared." He smiled faintly. "You were like a superhero out there," he said quietly. She laughed a little, shaking her head. "No, I was just a mom." But deep down, she knew she had done what any parent would do, step into the storm to protect her child. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with talk about what had happened. The video had already started to spread online. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers were sharing it, shocked by what they saw. The mother's phone buzzed constantly. Calls from colleagues, messages from friends, emails from reporters. She ignored most of them, focused instead on making sure her son felt safe. She cooked breakfast for him, though neither of them had much of an appetite. When he finally looked up and said, "Mom, I don't want people to see me like that, crying, scared," she reached across the table and took his hand. "You were brave," she said softly. "And if people see that, maybe it'll help them understand. Maybe it'll help another kid someday." She meant every word. She didn't want fame or attention. She wanted change. That night had reminded her that no amount of training or authority could protect someone from prejudice unless people spoke up and demanded better. As she sat with her son, watching the sun set through the kitchen window, she knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. The fear from the night before was still there, but it was slowly being replaced by determination. The boy leaned against her shoulder, tired but safe. She wrapped an arm around him, holding him close. silently promising that no one would ever make him feel powerless again. The flashing lights were gone, but their memory lingered. The world outside continued as usual, cars passing, people walking their dogs, the hum of life returning. But for them, everything had changed. The mother had seen both sides of the badge that night, and she knew which side she would fight for from now on. The days after the meeting at the community center were quiet at first. The mother and her son tried to settle back into their routines, but life didn't feel the same. There were moments when things seemed normal, school, work, dinner. But then something would remind them of that night and silence would fill the room again. The mother noticed how her son sometimes paused when walking down the street, if he saw a patrol car drive by. He pretended not to care, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. She knew that healing would take time. At work, the mother's name was being mentioned more than she liked. Colleagues spoke about her in the halls, some with admiration, others with discomfort. She overheard one agent say, "It's brave what she did," while another replied, "Yeah, but it's complicated when you call out law enforcement publicly." She kept her head down and focused on her tasks. She didn't want praise or pity, she just wanted fairness. Her supervisor called her into his office one afternoon. The blinds were half closed and a file lay open on his desk. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his tone cautious. "I'm fine," she said, though her tired eyes told another story. He nodded slowly. "I wanted to let you know the department's review is wrapping up. Internal Affairs finished their interviews. There will be a statement released soon." She nodded. "Do you know what they decided?" He hesitated before answering. "From what I've heard, they're admitting procedural mistakes were made. The officers involved are being reassigned for retraining. It's not as strong as I hoped, but it's something." The mother leaned back slightly, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't surprised. It was progress, but not justice. "Retraining," she repeated softly. "That word always sounds like a second chance, doesn't it?" The supervisor sighed. "Sometimes that's all the system gives. But because of you, this time it's different. People are paying attention." She gave a small nod, knowing he meant well. After leaving his office, she stood outside for a moment, watching the traffic pass. A cool breeze brushed her face. She thought about how many families had stood where she did, fighting for answers that came too late or never came at all. She promised herself she wouldn't let her story fade away. That evening, she and her son sat together at dinner. He had been quiet all week, lost in thought. Finally, he looked up and said, "Mom, are they in trouble now?" She sighed softly. "They're facing consequences, but not everything we hoped for." He frowned. "So they get to go back to work?" "They'll have to go through training and reviews," she explained. "But yes, they'll still be officers." He stared at his plate for a while before speaking again. "That doesn't seem fair," she nodded. "It's not, but it's a start." They ate in silence for a bit, and then she added gently, "You know, change doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it takes years, but every voice that speaks up makes it harder for people to ignore the truth." He looked up, his expression thoughtful. "You really think our story can change something?" She smiled faintly. "It already has." The following week, a local news station requested an interview. At first, she refused. She didn't want to turn her family's pain into a spectacle. But after thinking about it, she realized that sharing the truth could help others understand what families like hers face every day. She discussed it with her son, who hesitated at first but agreed to join her. When the cameras were set up in their living room, the mother spoke calmly. "I'm not here to attack anyone," she said. "I'm here to remind people that behind every headline is a real person, a parent, a child, a family. What happened to my son could have ended in tragedy, but it didn't. And for that, I'm grateful. But we can't ignore how close it came." The reporter asked the boy if he wanted to add anything. He looked into the camera and said quietly, "I just want people to understand that being scared doesn't mean you're guilty. I didn't do anything wrong, but I felt like I had to prove I wasn't a bad person. No one should feel that way."